America's political status quo is coming to an end.
Dun, dun, dun.
All those rules that we've built up for the past however many decades, I don't think they're going to apply anymore.
Sometimes that we need the challenge of redefining or defining.
We're in an age of redefining and defining things. Hello, and welcome to the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew.
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Before we get started, I want to remind you to go check out patriotpostshop.com, buy some merchandise. There's coffee, there's mugs, there's books, there's stickers, all sorts of stuff. Go check it out. Check out link in the description to take you to patriotpostshop.com. Also check out patriotpost.us. That is the best way by subscribing there that you can keep us on the air. Please do. We would like to stay on the air.
It's right. It's free.
It is.
Subscribe to the Patriot Post.
Absolutely. All right, let's get started. Our topic today, we didn't come up with a title, so I'm just going to use the title I wrote up ahead of time. America's political status quo is coming to an end.
Dun, dun, dun.
Yes, this is I'm putting on my seer headdress, and this is what I see coming in the future. This is my prediction.
Okay.
Thomas, you want to start us off with this article you wrote last week about the whole Shiloh Hendrix story? Can you just run down that?
Yeah, basically, I think I entitled it Racism, Fighting Racism with Racism is Racist. I believe that was my title.
Yes.
What I was looking at was two kind of major events that have been, well, one more major than the other, you could argue, but big events in the pop culture or the culture.
Yeah. Internet culture.
Yeah. One was the murder of Austin Metcalf by Carmelo Anthony.
Yeah.
That was unfortunately two teenagers at a track meet. Most of you probably heard this, but the one was white, one was black, and there was a dispute, and the black teenager ended up stabbing to death the white teenager. It has resulted in, after the fact, this kind of touchstone for certain folks regarding kind of the racial strife or this growing racial strife.
Yeah.
The other event was Shiloh Hendrix. She's a mother up in Minnesota, I believe.
Yeah.
And evidently her little son was interacting with another young black boy. She's white. Black boy at a playground. We don't know fully what occurred prior to the video recording, but at some point, this other individual, an immigrant black man from, I think, North Africa somewhere, I can't remember exactly where, he starts to film her to confront her because he heard her calling the black child the N-word. And so he's confronting her with it, and instead of her apologizing or kind of like denying it, she just doubles down.
Yeah. So clarification, you said an African immigrant, he's a Somali immigrant, just so we have that detail.
Anyway, so he posted the video afterwards, and it kind of went viral. Well, in response, instead of her getting canceled like has happened in the past, Karen'd or whatever, she decided to defend herself, started a GoFundMe or a Give, Send, Go, I can't remember which organization, one of these organizations where you raise support for your cause. And I think as of some point last week, she'd raised over $500,000 in this, in her defense, evidently, even though she's not been charged with anything. This is a social faux pas, you could say. But people are basically saying through that, the argument is they're sick and tired of the woke cancel culture from the left. Right. And this shows, and I've seen articles saying it's dead as a result of this.
Yeah. So, and it is really notable that, because usually if you get filmed saying the N-word, which is a horrible word, we don't endorse using it.
Yeah.
Your life is over in terms of public life. Maybe your friends or family will stick around you, but
if you're a white person.
If you're a white person.
If you're black, it's not racist, supposedly. Correct.
But there's also a difference between using the ER at the end and using the A sound at the end, and that changes it. But in general, if you use it, you're done if you're white. I'm looking at the Give, Send, Go right now, actually, and she has raised, as of this moment, out of her $1 million goal, Shiloh Hendrix has raised $773,953.
Yeah.
And I think the interesting thing is that people are saying this is like, it's the point for a lot of people donating, allegedly, none of us have donated, so we can't say for sure, is that it's not about the N-word is a good word and she should be allowed to say it. It's about, we're done playing this game. If you want to try to cancel white people for being racist against black people, now we're going to make them rich. So you got to stop playing this game and you got to figure out some new game to play because we're done with this. That seems to be the thrust
Yeah,
of this.
that seems to be part of the argument. It's hard, like you said, it's hard to know what motivates all these people. I do think there's this, it's been described as a backlash against this kind of double standard when it comes to the discussion of racism in America.
Yeah.
And this is kind of the backlash against that, because effectively, if you were considered a minority group that historically had been oppressed by the broadly white American culture, then any action that you may have engaged in that was by definitional racist doesn't really count or isn't really as bad, because historically your people were abused or victims of the broader white culture.
Yeah.
And that's been the narrative that has been taught in schools through the woke kind of curriculum, all this other stuff. But the problem is it itself is racism by definition. Anytime you take anybody and judge them solely based upon their ethnicity, you're engaging in racism.
Right. If you tell them you bear guilt of your white ancestors, that's racism.
Right.
Did you mention, you may have said this already, Thomas, but
Yeah.
Carmelo Anthony or his family started a GoFundMe for him as well.
Yes.
Or a Give Some Go.
I don't know if I mentioned in the article. I didn't mention it in talking about it. But yes, so the defense for him was created because he's obviously going to court.
Yeah.
He's been charged with murder, as far as I understand, in regards to this situation. And so to defend him in court, his parents and others, I think, that are involved in it, set up a fund to try to raise money for him to defend himself.
And they've raised, of their $600,000 goal, I'm looking at it, they've raised $528,382.
Right.
So that happened, and then the next week, I think the Shiloh Hendricks thing happened.
Right, or 2 weeks after. I think there was it was within the month at least.
And so a lot of people are saying, okay, so the Shiloh Hendricks thing is a direct answer to the Carmelo thing.
Yeah, and this is where I struggle, because I think there's a desire to want to make connections. It's with events in a large kind of this 5 or 50,000 view kind of look down and say, hey, this happened here, and this two racial groups are involved, and this happened here, and two racial groups involved. Somehow they're interconnected. But we need to be careful with that too. Also, what's interesting is one happens in Texas. The murder was in Texas. This latest event where she's obviously using racist language was in Minnesota. Now, what else happened in Minnesota about 5 years ago?
George Floyd.
Yeah. So there's, what is in the more localized area of that as well that may play into this narrative.
Yeah. Right. And in your article, you mentioned Daniel Penny as well.
Yeah, and that was in New York City.
Where he very justifiably defended passengers on the subway from a crazy man.
Yeah.
And
a veteran, no doubt, of the United States Marine Corps.
Yes.
Yeah. And he was taken, Daniel Penny was the veteran, and he was taken absolutely to the cleaners, had his life just about ruined. He finally got a favorable judgment because it really was him defending other people. But he was raked over the coals to no end for doing the right thing. And because he was white and this crazy person was black, everyone, said this was a racist thing, which is not what it was at all.
Yeah, it's part of that narrative. So to back up to the kind of topic we're getting into, when we talk about woke, and we're specifically talking about that has dominated our culture seemingly up until the recent election, woke leftist view of basically it was a justification for being, in one sense, racist against whites.
Yes.
And so now we're talking about the kind of what we're gearing for, and the point of my article was there appears to be a growing kind of racist, or I'm using the term woke, on elements on the right side of the spectrum against and so it's a backlash against the left woke. Yeah. And so that's kind of the topic we're looking at, and more broadly, but specifically, so when we're talking about it, we want this podcast to kind of break down what we're seeing on the political scene for the right side of the aisle.
Yeah. Right.
Yes.
So this is like kind of just an example of how the tides are changing.
Yeah.
And then we can break it down.
After the election of Donald Trump, he not only won the Electoral College, he also won the popular vote, which is significant because that shows a major shift from his first election and from, I think, the last Republican to win the popular
was 2004.
2004 with Bush.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. The voters turned out in record numbers and delivered an historic victory.
Which is, remember, in 2004, with the re-election of Bush, he was a wartime president,
Right.
and people still had fresh in their memories the attack on 9/11.
Yeah.
So that was a very unique circumstance. This one is, I would say, more impactful that Trump won the popular vote.
Yeah,
in this case.
this to me is more of a indication that there's been a sea change in public opinion.
Yes.
And I think it was, in a lot of ways, it is a backlash against the woke that just went over the top and has so corrupted, you could argue, the Democrat Party that it doesn't even know its head from its tail right now. But
yeah, so
Speaking
before I
of-
get to this, Andrew, do you have any anything on this that we should touch on before I read my whole breakdown? Because it's going to be a second.
I think we should just hop right into it.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Thomas and I talk a lot, and Andrew gets overridden sometimes. All right. So I'm just going to break this down. I wrote this up in our preparation, so I'll just try to summarize it real quick. So after the election, as Thomas was saying, the Democrats, the sea had turned against them. The left media had lost their monopoly on the narrative, I would say.
Yeah.
Now there's too many other voices that can say, actually, what you're saying is BS. And so the Democrats, in my view, and I could be wrong on this, they're really on the rocks, whether they rally and continue to be a stable force in American politics or they kind of break up into smaller groups. I think they're more likely to break into smaller groups right now, but maybe they'll figure it out. But moving past them, I think the American people have rejected wokeism and DEI. And when I say wokeism, I'm specifically talking about people who think that boys can be given hormones and turn into girls or vice versa. I'm not using woke the same way Thomas does. Not that I think Thomas is wrong. We disagree on that specific term, I think. So there's a few groups I'm seeing on the right, on the side that voted for Trump, the MAGA people, you might say. And they are not necessarily allies. Donald Trump has managed to bring a tent over them and make them all vote the same way. But I think when Donald Trump is gone, and he will be at the end of this term, whatever he's saying, he's not going to run for a third term. And when he's gone, I think these groups that he brought together are going to go every which way. And I think what we're going to see is a lot of the standard, this is how American politics works, all those rules that we've built up for the past however many decades, I don't think they're going to apply anymore. And so these are the groups I see on the new right. There's the Constitution conservatives. These people believe in the American founding as our cultural origin, that it was put together by geniuses, the founding fathers, and that their principles and methods work, and the problems we have in America are caused by straying from those principles and methods. And further, method matters. The way you do things matters. You can't engage in identity politics. I would say people on this side are the Patriot Post. Check us out, patriotpost.us. Make sure to go search up the website. Give us your email address. Subscribe. Ben Shapiro, I would say, is on this side as well.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to say in the current administration, I think the main leader is probably Marco Rubio. I'd say he's a good leader since he's wearing like 5 hats right now in this administration.
Yeah.
But he's the Secretary of State.
You could say DeSantis as well.
Yeah, I would put DeSantis in this group.
I thought about it, and I'll explain my reasoning in a second why I didn't put him here. Then there's the results are what matter Republicans. This group believes that now they have power, they should use it. Traditionally, Republicans kind of say, well, we could use the power, but then the Democrats will use it, so we should not use it anywhere we wouldn't want it used against us. Mm-hmm. The fact is Republicans are much more leery of having power used against them than Democrats are, so what these people argue usually happens is that Republicans don't do things and then Democrats do things and then Republicans keep not doing things. And so now they're in power. I'd say Donald Trump is really the main guy on this side. And he's like, I'm going to use the power. I have it. Democrats have used it. I'm going to use it. They'll have to, take me to court and then I'll abide by a ruling. But they have to take me to court to get me to quit this. I think that's another serious side. So the constitutional, the results are what matter. Those are two sides. Then there's this third side, what I call the identitarian right. I think they're traditionally young white men, and they're saying, hey, gay people, lesbians, black people, Hispanics, Chinese people, they all have worked together to fight for their rights politically. And so they're like working together as groups and fighting for their rights, and white people haven't been doing that. Let's do it. 1 in 6 Americans is a white man, 1 in 3 is a young white man, or sorry, vice versa. 1 in 3 is a white man, 1 in 6 is a young white man. So if this group says, if we work together, then we're going to have a significant impact and we're going to be able to achieve good results for ourselves. I'd say people on this side, there's no real leaders at the moment, but there's lots of groundswell on X. I think lots of young people feel this way. I would say maybe Andrew Torba, the guy who founded Gab, is on this side. I hesitate to say it, but I guess like Andrew Tate.
Yeah, probably so.
Yeah.
I'm trying to be more fair than Andrew Tate. I feel like it's unfair to say Andrew Tate's on your side, therefore you're bad. But I kind of think he is on this side. There's some overlap between lots of these groups, but definitely with Christian nationalists.
Yeah, depending on how you define that, yes.
Right. Well, and definitions really, really matter.
Yeah.
A fourth group is isolationist Republicans. They are more traditional conservative Republicans, but they really, really, like their tagline is no new wars. It's just no new wars. It doesn't matter what the war is. It doesn't matter the context. It doesn't matter what justification you have for engaging in this war. No new wars. We should stop engaging in wars anywhere outside of continental U.S.
And we don't police the world.
Right. I'd say the leaders of this group are J.D. Vance, I think, is in this group, and Tucker
Really?
Carlson.
Interesting. Yeah, I guess I could see that.
I mean, I think
Carlson.
I think J.D. Vance has made statements that would move him more this way. Yeah, I think he's got a toe in this world. I wouldn't put him fully in it.
And we can discuss whether I'm right on these groups or not. This is something I kind of came up pretty quickly. Of course, I didn't even include these really, but there's like neoconservatives who are like, yes, let's bomb Iran or let's do all these things. And there's that group too. I don't think they're very potent, so I didn't really include them. There's people who I call the reject modernity, return to tradition people.
The trads.
The trads, they kind of think, hey, maybe the Enlightenment was not such a great idea. Let's go back to, honestly, they seem to want to go back to kings and castles and knights and, you know, basically the feudal system.
Yeah.
Some of them maybe more want to go to like a nationalist fascist thing, but I still think these are kind of the same group. One person, he's an intellectual and he does it kind of tongue in cheek, but one person who's actively saying we got to go back to a monarchy is this guy, Curtis Yarvin. He's not super well known, but I've seen him talk, and it's interesting to hear him expound his view. And he's not some crazy guy. Mm-hmm. Well, that's me saying it.
Definitions matter.
Yes. And I think Christian nationalists really fall into this group as well. And then the last group that voted for Trump that I think may end up going a different way is what we call the traditional liberals. That's going to be Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., Joe Rogan. These are people who are not really Republicans, but they were done with wokeism and DEI, so they voted for Trump. And then James Lindsay's in this group, and he's really pointing out that these groups exist and really does not like some of these groups and goes off on them, and appropriately so, you might argue.
Yeah.
Okay, that was long-winded, but that's the groups.
I think you said it earlier, Thomas. This is kind of what happens when you have a populist movement, particularly in this instance where we have Trump, who has kind of brought all of these under an umbrella, as you said, Sterling, and so currently kind of working together and have pushed The Rock into the winning category of we won against woke and DEI.
Right.
So I think that was kind of one of the biggest feelings culturally that has united these factions, and particularly that really rings true in the case of the last group being the moderate group, who are they're not really Republicans, they're not really, or they're not conservatives.
Right.
You know, Joe Rogan, Tulsi Gabbard, those kind of people, just moderate liberal people.
Yeah.
So the question is, once Trump is out of the picture, as you said earlier, likely just going to all fall to pieces.
That's kind of what I'm worried about. I think there's a solid chance that the two-party system is done. I think there's a really solid chance. There is a better chance that the two-party system will endure, but I think this moment is maybe the most likely that the two-party system ends that we've ever seen.
I think that our system is designed to function basically as a two-party system. There has been moments in our history where we've had multiple parties, and it's only usually through a few years, and then they coalesce behind one because they have to. That, you know, right before the Civil War, you had the four basic parties the Democrat Party broke into two, the ones that were Northern Democrats, Southern Democrats, and that was the issue. Slavery was part of that issue question. You had the Republicans who were anti-slavery, and then you had the Constitutional Unionists, I believe they were the fourth party. And that ended up splitting up the ticket enough that, Lincoln could get elected president without winning any states in the South.
Yeah.
Which then, fueled the Southern secession.
Yeah.
But it doesn't last. I think you may be right that this might blow everything up, because right now you're having the Democrats are just really struggling to try to find stable footing, because they lean so hard into the identitarian and embrace the woke politics of the radical fringes of their society, of their base, that they've been taken over effectively by that group. I mean, David Hogg comes in, and one of the things that the woke do is they want to purify their own side, and so they basically start almost like a purification campaign or a purge to get rid of those who aren't going to tout the new standard or the new values. If you fault on that, then your head's going to be on the chopping block. Yeah. And so that is one of the things that you're seeing play out within the Democrat Party. It has kind of for a little bit, but the up and comers are the young ones. Yeah. Everybody's saying, well, we need youth. Unfortunately for Democrats, all the youth seems to be as far left as you can get.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that, I'm just going to pull this up because there is an interesting quote I found just today from David Hogg, who is the Democrat National Committee Vice Chair. He said, "It feels like the two parties in some senses have flipped. We Democrats have created a culture where if you say the wrong thing, you're excommunicated." And he's saying it's time to do away with that. And he is one of these young new leaders. So some of the young people are maybe not so extreme, but I think David Hogg probably is pretty extreme, and he's just hiding it. But that was just applicable to what you were saying.
Yeah, and to his comment, and this is one of the things that makes politics, I would argue, such a dirty business. It's historically been, politics is one of the worst kind of fields or careers to get involved in, because, you're constantly lying to people, stabbing in the back, et cetera, et cetera. That's kind of the reputation. I think the biggest reputation with politics has to do with speech and how people use words. Are politicians using words to inform their voters, or are they using words to misinform and manipulate?
Right.
Because I think that's exactly what the tactics that have been used on the left, and then what the woke does is the way in which it redefines terms without being clear that it's redefining terms. So that, like, it can redefine racism and away from the classic definition of racism, which is judging someone negatively solely based upon their ethnicity.
Right.
And then it adds a whole nother dynamic to it, this neo-Marxism or Marxism, in which it sets up the oppressor-oppressed distinction and then bases it on race and says, if you're of the minority race, you're oppressed. If you're of the majority race, you're oppressor. It doesn't matter about your behavior or anything you've done. One side's right, one side's wrong.
It depends who you're descended from. Right. Thomas, do you want to real quick, and maybe Andrew, you'd be good since I think you're a little bit more removed. Thomas and I kind of slightly disagree on the definition of woke. Yeah. Can you outline why you use it, Thomas, for the identitarian right? And then Andrew, maybe you can play middleman here to explain what we're disagreeing on here. Okay, so I kind of agree with James Lindsay, who didn't come up with the term woke right, but has adopted it and probably is the one who's most known for promoting it as an idea. Basically, the term woke comes out of the progressive movement, you could say. It's an identitarian or racially aware term. Maybe back it up a little bit. It's kind of comes out of the critical theory world. The term woke is synonymous with awaken. It means you've been awoken to or awakened to this structural system within society that has effectively ruined your life.
Yeah, it's designed to keep you or your group down, and it's unjust. And what you're trying to do is fight against this system that's been there. But you've been awakened to see the system. Other people don't see the system. Okay. That's the problem.
So that's what you mean when you say woke. When I say woke, I agree that it comes out of the critical race theory stuff. Or critical theory stuff. It has postmodernism, which says there are no truths, and it has Marxism, which says there is truth and it's class struggle. It has all those things worked in, but it's also, when I say woke, and I think when most people say woke, and I think we can leave it here and find a new term for this thing you're describing. When I say woke, what I mean is you think a boy with the right hormones can become a girl, or vice versa, or there is no real definition of what a boy is beyond what people imagine it to be. That's what I mean when I say woke, and that's what I am so opposed to.
Yeah, and I mean, you're using it for a shorthand for, I would say, which is how people have been using it for the last 4 years, a shorthand for radical left
ideology.
Yeah, values and ideology. I'm using it more as descriptive of a methodology in regards to an approach to politics. And so when you're talking kind of like identitarianism, we can say there's identitarian left and identitarian right, because that's a definitional way of how they approach politics. So I'm saying woke is a way of saying here's a system of oppression that we've awakened to that has kept you oppressed. Yep. For the right, their system of oppression they're looking to is the post-war consensus is what they use. Yeah. And what they're saying is the liberal world at the time, at the end of World War II, where fascism is defeated and the radical, what they classify fascism as a right-leaning ideology politically. They say the liberal left won the war, and so what they've done is created a consensus about what is acceptable views on politics, society, etc. And it's designed to explicitly rule out these other views that they would say are legitimate views on politics and society, etc.
So I got to jump in. So earlier when you were saying these people have awoken, Andrew, sorry.
Yeah.
I've tried to get you in here, but if you have a thought.
Oh, I do have a thought.
Okay, go for it. I'll jump in after you go.
Well, I think the difference here is, you're talking about a structure and then you're talking about an ideology, but there is overlap here.
Yeah.
And so particularly when you mention woke, Sterling, from the perspective of the ideology, that plays into the structure as power is defined and as truth is defined. And I think, from the left perspective, those who hold the power are those who can create. They can basically make whatever rules up that they want to make up. Right. And so when you see the shorthand version, those are the rules that they've decided that they want for whatever reason. Right. And they're trying to push that ball forward by way of saying, we are currently being oppressed. And so anyone who is oppressing us is our enemy. And as long as we can get on top of them, and then we can make the rules. Yeah. Now, I think to term woke right, this is where we're having kind of a disagreement maybe on the terms, because we're trying to apply the same logic in the direction of right. And I think it works only on the very root basis of where there's a difference in ideologies.
There's a difference in ideology, but there's a similarity in practice.
Right.
Yeah. So
that's where you start to see this, like cancel culture.
We will see about the cancel culture thing. There have been attempts on what you call the woke right to cancel people. I don't think they've really taken off in the same way.
No, they don't have the power to yet, but they still are playing with
those circles. I don't think it's taken off in the same way.
I would wait.
I agree. The jury's out.
Yeah.
The other thing, though, you were talking about this group that says there are these structural things that have been oppressing us, and these are
post-war consensus.
Well, so that there's two things you were describing.
Yeah.
One is the post-war consensus. The other is this thing that says the other races are, especially frequently it's the Jews are out to get us, or they've kind of built everything.
Right.
That's separate, I would say, from the post-war consensus, because I do actually think, if there is such a thing as a post-war consensus from World War II, that era of history is mostly over. I think it's right at the tail end. And I think a lot of those things that if we want to call it that, the post-war consensus said was true or acceptable, I think we're going to start seeing more and more people are like, I don't really care what that consensus set is true or acceptable. We're gonna start exploring these ideas.
Well, here's where I push back. I don't think there is such a thing as a post-war consensus.
And I thought that might be your
Yeah, I think that's been a boogeyman that the woke right has created to justify asking questions about such things like, was Churchill the true villain of World War II?
And that's a ridiculous question. Anyone who says Churchill's the real villain of World War II is a moron. You're a retard. There we go.
But they are doing it, and they're actually gaining some traction in these circles with it.
They are. Yeah, I agree. So here's my real reason I don't like woke for the woke right.
Okay, maybe define woke how you would define.
Well, I have defined it, but I'm going to just say why I don't like it. Because most of what people mean today by woke right is people or beliefs that would have fit right in with the KKK 80 years ago. And we already had language to define the KKK and other white supremacist or racist groups. I don't really think we need to reinvent the wheel. We've got those terms. I think woke defines something else that happened in the 2010s and 2020s. We've got the terms from 80 years ago. We can just use those. When
when you're talking about these groups, would you be more comfortable calling, for example, the identitarians basically the KKK?
Well, I wouldn't call them the KKK specifically because that does have an exact meaning.
That's an exact meaning. So what are you going to call this group? The white supremacists?
I would call them the identitarian right. That's what I call them.
Okay, and I think that that's fine. I think it's the trouble we're getting into here is recognizing what I would say is words that help define everything equally or consistently. Yeah. So when you're going to use the label identitarian right, then basically the left, the identitarian left, I would argue, is the woke left. It's kind of the same. They're basically the same animal with different focuses of desire for control.
Right. So I don't think we have to keep on this, but I would just say here's my metaphor to explain, I think, exactly what you're talking about.
Okay.
You have, say, in a military, you have Sergeant Smith and Sergeant Johnson. You call Sergeant Smith Gunny because that's his nickname. Okay. And you call Sergeant Johnson because he doesn't have a nickname.
Okay.
And woke is the nickname for the identitarian left, and it's the nickname. And I don't really think it deserves to be continued as a term. That's my reason to reject that term.
Okay. I'm just going by their own definition of what they mean when they say woke. That's why.
Maybe the problem here, though, is what they say what they mean when they say woke, but what it has turned into.
Mm-hmm. Maybe a better term that we could use that's more of a biblical term is just Gnostic. Both of them are basically falling into this Gnostic secret language cult mentality because they're both cults, and they move toward this kind of cultish way of defining language, defining their rules, no outside authorities above them. They're the kind of gatekeepers of their own language and their own values. Nobody gets to impose upon them or question them or say to them, no, you're wrong.
Okay, real quick, because I think we should try to start wrapping up. So the woke right, as you would call it, or the Gnostics, or the identitarian right, as I call them.
Identitarian, Gnostic, right.
I think that mostly is in my 6 groups I outlined, the identitarian right. I think there's overlap with the reject modernity, return to tradition group. And then there's some overlap with some other groups.
Yeah, there's definitely overlap to some degree with the isolationists.
Yes. Here's my question, and maybe a good way to wrap up. So I outlined 6 groups: Constitution conservatives, I think that's who we are. Results are what matter, Republicans. Identitarian right, isolationist Republicans, reject modernity, return to tradition, and traditional liberals. Do we think that's a decent breakdown of the people on the right? Is there any significant areas we missed? Andrew?
Well, no, I don't think so. I was about to say, the people who just want to be left alone, but that's really the isolationists.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think there has always existed a subset of the quiet majority who just don't really speak up. There are certainly like Christian subset groups who say, I'm not even going to vote because it's not even worth it. It's so corrupt. So I don't know if those people have a very significant seat at the table.
But they have a significant number, I think.
Yeah. So I don't know what you would call those people. Maybe we've left those out. The folks who aren't really saying anything.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. How are you going to classify that?
Right. Yeah. I think the folks who aren't really saying anything is a fine term. Yeah. All right. But the other 6 groups, you think those are pretty good names for some of the things we're seeing?
Probably so.
Yeah.
Another interesting one to think about that played a key part in this last election is the Amish.
Mm-hmm.
And so religious fundamentalists, and I think they are distinctly separate from which one is it?
The reject modernity.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think they are separate because they never embrace
Exactly.
modernity.
Yeah, exactly. They are, I guess just the Amish as their own group stand alone. I think that's fair.
Because they swayed the election.
They did.
I
in
think
Pennsylvania.
the biggest struggle for both parties and for the American, and maybe the political system, not just in America but in the West, we're in the throes now of why postmodernity was so damaging.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you've lost any sense of amongst populations of absolute truth, like there's absolute standards. Now those are being challenged left, right, and center by by many of these different groups. There's some that say no, there is absolute truth and it matters. But then, what is that? How do you define it? And you're getting into a lot of conspiracy theories are growing left, right, and center, and people you wouldn't even imagine are like promoting some conspiracy theories that make you scratch your head.
There used to be more of a universal culture.
Yeah,
everyone
culture
adhered to.
that
Sure.
but the value systems that everyone could kind of say that is true, or this person's the expert, and the term expert wasn't a dirty word.
Yeah.
That's kind of fallen apart.
That ties into the destruction of the media, which we mentioned at the beginning, and the destruction of all these institutions. Where people no longer have faith in these things. Yeah. All right. I'm trying to just think if there's anything we should cover. I just want to mention in the Reject Modernity, Return to Tradition, I don't know if this is quite this group, but apparently a lot of young Americans and people in Western countries have been converting to Catholicism because they like the liturgy, they like the Latin Mass, they like the kind of traditional Catholic stuff.
Yeah.
I
Orthodoxy as well is also on the rise, I think.
I think they're hungry for something that seems stable.
Yes,
I
think that.
And old.
Yep.
Consistent. Yeah.
Yep. So I guess that's kind of our rambling outline of what's going on.
Yeah.
A fight of what is woke right? Does it even exist? And what are the different groups under the tent pole of Trump's Republican Party? And where will it go? I don't think it's going to last. I think we're going to see quite the upheaval in 2028.
I think he blew up conservatism. Mm-hmm. That's not how you say it. Conservatism.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Sometimes we need the challenge of redefining,
Sure.
or defining maybe.
And I think we're in an age of redefining and defining things that people assumed we had definitions for, but then for years, every definition for everything, including what is a woman, was blown up. So now we have to do it again.
Yeah. Square one.
Square one. Maybe that's the note to end on. We are back to square one. What's going on? Who knows? It's really not clear.
Yeah. Let's reestablish our foundational principles in something that's strong.
Yes. Yeah. I think we need to have a constitutional convention of states. That's really the only real big hopeful thing I see in the future.
We shall see.
It may happen.
See.
All right. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian with Thomas, Sterling, and Andrew. We are brought to you by the Patriot Post, which is the oldest conservative news digest on the web. It's right and it's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. And also check out patriotpostshop.com, buy some merchandise. Both of those two ways, by subscribing or buying merchandise, that's the best way you can keep us on the air. Please do. Hit that bell icon on YouTube so you see when we upload a video, and leave us some comments. We are taking a look at those, and we've made a few episodes based on what people in the comments said. So let us know. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.